She looks good. For someone replaced. The words sliced through the room the moment Elise walked in. But they didn't know she wasn't there for him. She was there because his family, the same family who once called her the one, had made a mistake they could no longer hide. The kind of mistake money can't bury and bloodlines can't excuse. By the end of the night, the question wouldn't be why he left her, but why he ever thought he could come back from her. Stay with us. Because what begins as heartbreak ends in a homecoming. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. Have you ever watched someone choose less, only to realize you were the one they could never forget? The morning was still half asleep, the world washed in silver mist. The sea moved in slow breaths against the wooden pier, and the gulls had not yet found their voices. Etta Thompson stood alone, camera lifted to her eye, waiting for the horizon to open. The cold bit gently at her fingers, but she didn't flinch. Her focus was steady, practiced, as though stillness itself had become her refuge. 10 years away, 10 years of motion. Planes, hotels, nameless cities, and yet here she was again, back where the tide once carried her away and memory refused to let her go. The camera clicked softly, capturing the moment the first thread of sunlight broke through the fog. She lowered it, eyes following the shimmer of gold unfurling over the water. For anyone else, it would have been a perfect shot, tranquil, luminous, untouched. But Etta saw what wasn't in the frame, the ghosts that lived between the waves, the version of herself she'd buried in this town. She had told her editor she came back for the assignment, for the series on coastal revival. But that was only half the truth. The other half was a name she still couldn't say without feeling something shift inside her chest. Orion Welsh. He was the reason she'd learned to leave before being left. The reason she'd stopped believing that belonging and love could exist in the same place. Once, he'd been the boy who looked at her like she was light, the heir who hated the world he was meant to inherit. They had built something fragile and beautiful under the shadow of his family's estate, until the night it all collapsed under the weight of whispers and money. She had been accused of betrayal, dismissed before sunrise, her mother's tears swallowed by silence, and Orion, bound by duty, by fear, had let her go without a word. Now, as the morning grew brighter, she felt the same estate watching her from across the water. Its glass walls caught the rising sun, throwing sharp reflections across the bay. Inside, Orion Welsh stood barefoot on the balcony, coffee cooling in his hand, eyes fixed on the mist he couldn't see through. He didn't know why the dawn felt different, why the air carried a pulse he couldn't name. He only knew that something he'd lost was moving somewhere out there, something that had once known his heartbeat as its own. Etta raised her camera again, focusing on the horizon. The light was perfect now, soft, forgiving, full of beginnings disguised as endings. She pressed the shutter, unaware that in the house across the bay, Orion Welsh turned his head toward the sound he couldn't possibly hear. Back then, the estate seemed larger than life, its white pillars gleaming like watchful sentinels against the sea. To Etta, it was both a world apart and a world she could never fully enter. Her mother kept the Welsh household immaculate, floors that gleamed, silver polished until it caught the light like ice. Etta had grown up in the margins of that perfection, slipping quietly through the halls with a sketchbook tucked under her arm, careful never to leave a trace of herself behind. Orion Welsh was the one person who saw her anyway. He was 17, restless, and already tired of a name that bought him respect he hadn't earned. She was 16, curious and untamed, with eyes that met his without apology. Their first conversation happened by accident. She had been taking photographs in the garden, capturing the reflection of the fountain in a shard of broken glass, when he startled her with a question about light. From that moment, the world between them began to shift. Nights turned into hours spent beneath the fig tree, trading secrets and whispers, the house asleep above them. He spoke of wanting to leave, of studying architecture somewhere far away. She listened, half believing, half afraid. When she laughed, he said it sounded like salt water and sunrise. When he looked at her, she forgot how to breathe. They built their own language in those stolen moments. Notes slipped under doors, footprints left in sand, the echo of laughter in places they shouldn't have been. But nothing in that world was theirs to keep. One summer evening, a storm rolled in, tearing through the coast with wild winds. By morning, rumors had begun to spread. Someone had leaked the Welsh family's financial records to the press, exposing a secret investment that cost them dearly. The staff were questioned one by one, and eyes turned toward the girl who had always carried a camera. Etta never had the chance to explain. Her mother was dismissed without warning, the family's lawyer handling it with clinical detachment. By the time Orion learned what had happened, she and her mother were gone. He had gone to her house that night, pounding on a door that no one answered. In the weeks that followed, he tried to uncover the truth, but every path led back to silence. His father's warning had been clear: loyalty to family or ruin, and so he chose survival, even as it hollowed him from within. Years later, he would still wake to the memory of her running barefoot through the garden, rain in her hair, eyes fierce with something he hadn't had the courage to match. The Welsh estate had changed, though not enough to forget its ghosts. The marble floors gleamed beneath the chandelier light. The air scented faintly with jasmine and sea salt, just as it had the night everything fell apart. Guests drifted through the ballroom in sequined gowns and tailored suits. Champagne flutes raised in gestures of effortless civility. At the edge of the room, Etta moved quietly, camera poised, her movements deliberate and unseen. She had trained herself to disappear in rooms like this, to become an observer, not a participant. The lens was her armor now, the only thing separating her from the world that once swallowed her whole. She focused on the details, the flicker of candlelight on glass, the laughter that rose and fell like a rehearsed performance, the way privilege always carried its own rhythm. Through her viewfinder, everything looked composed, beautiful, distant, until her camera caught him. Orion stood near the grand piano, half-turned toward the crowd, his expression unreadable beneath the polite charm he'd perfected. The years had carved definition into him, his jaw stronger, his frame broader, his presence quieter but heavier somehow. His suit was dark, immaculate, but his tie hung slightly loosened, as if rebellion still lived beneath the surface. And then he looked up. Their eyes met through the glass. The air shifted. For one suspended second, the noise around them fell away. It was as if the room forgot itself, as if the years collapsed into a single heartbeat. Etta froze, the camera trembling in her grip. She told herself it was surprise, not emotion. But the ache in her chest said otherwise. Orion's breath caught, subtle but visible. He blinked once, as though to test if she was real, and when she didn't vanish, something old and fragile in him cracked open. He had imagined this moment 1,000 ways, running into her by chance, apologizing, explaining. But none of those rehearsals had prepared him for the sight of her standing there, composed, distant, and beautiful in a way that made regret feel like a physical wound. Before he could move, Harper appeared beside him, radiant and commanding, introducing donors, ushering smiles. The moment shattered. Etta turned away, forcing herself to focus on her work, capturing faces, laughter, anything but his. Still, she could feel his gaze following her through the crowd, steady, searching, like a tide trying to find the shore it once called home. And somewhere behind the practiced click of her camera, Etta knew. This time, the past wasn't finished with either of them. The night after the gala, the estate slept beneath a velvet sky, the music and laughter fading into the hush of waves against the cliffs. Etta lingered near the gate, her camera slung across her shoulder, her heart restless. She told herself she was just checking her angles, looking for night shots to complete the assignment. But when she heard footsteps behind her, steady, familiar, deliberate, she didn't need to turn to know who it was. "Still chasing the light," Orion said softly. His voice was lower now, textured by years she hadn't lived beside him. "Still running from it," she replied without looking back. He stepped closer, the scent of salt and cedar surrounding him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty. It hummed with everything they hadn't said. When she finally turned, the moonlight caught his face. Older, yes, but still marked by the same quiet intensity that had once undone her. His eyes, those storm-gray eyes, carried exhaustion beneath their calm, as if peace had become something he'd learned to imitate. "I tried," he said. Just 2 words, but they landed like a confession. She blinked, wary, her arms crossing instinctively. "Tried what?" "That night," he said, his voice steady but roughened at the edges. "To stop them. To stop my father. But I was 20, and afraid. They said you—" He stopped, as if even speaking the accusation out loud would dirty the air. "I knew it wasn't true, Etta. I knew. But by the time I got to you, you were gone." The wind lifted her hair, and she let it fall, unwilling to let him see the tears pressing against her composure. "And that's supposed to change what happened?" she asked quietly. "Because you tried?" "No," he said. "But it's the only truth I have left to offer." They stood beneath the old fig tree then, the same one that once sheltered their secret. Its branches arched above them, still carrying the faint carving of their initials weathered by time. He traced it with his hand, a small, broken smile on his lips. "I thought about erasing it once," he murmured. "Couldn't do it." Etta looked at the carving, the faint, intertwining letters, and for a moment, her anger softened into something sadder. "You should have," she said. "I couldn't," he answered. "Some things you're meant to live with." The tide crashed somewhere below them, unseen but insistent, and though Etta turned away first, her steps toward the gate felt heavier now, like the beginning of something she wasn't sure she could bear to finish. The next afternoon, the sea was restless, wind whipping through the cliffs as if the coast itself were remembering. Etta stood near the edge of the property, the sky heavy with the threat of rain, her camera forgotten at her side. She hadn't meant to tell him, not yet. But the truth had been sitting in her throat for years, sharp and unspoken. When Orion found her there, his expression carried both hesitation and hunger, the kind that comes from needing to know, even if the answer might undo everything. "Why didn't you fight back?" he asked quietly. "You could have told me, Etta." "Told anyone?" She laughed once, soft and bitter. "And who would have believed me? Your father? The same man who decided guilt before he asked a single question?" He winced, but didn't deny it. The wind tugged at his jacket as he stepped closer. "Then tell me now," he said. "All of it. Please." Etta's eyes flicked toward the ocean, her voice steady but low. "Your mother came to me the week before it happened. She was terrified. She'd been sending money to the dock workers, quietly, through one of the accounts listed under her name. Your father found out. She begged me to help her move the funds, to hide the paper trail until she could explain. I did it because she was kind to me, because she didn't treat me like a mistake in the wrong house." Orion's breath caught. "My mother." "She wanted to protect them," Etta said. "She said those men had families too. That loyalty wasn't just about bloodlines. When the story broke, your father saw the transfers and assumed it was me. He said I'd stolen from him. She tried to confess, but he shut her down. I watched her crumble under the weight of his fury, and I couldn't say a word. If I had, she would have lost everything. Silence filled the space between them. Orion's jaw clenched, grief and shame threading through the stillness. She died carrying that, he said, almost to himself. And I... He stopped, his voice breaking on the edges of disbelief. I spent years hating the wrong person. Etta finally turned to him, her expression unreadable. You weren't the only one who paid the price. The rain came then, sudden and cold, blurring the distance between them. Orion didn't move. Neither did she. The truth hung there, raw, unadorned, cleansing and cruel all at once. And in that storm, the ruin of the Welsh name began, not from scandal, but from the weight of everything that had been left unsaid. The days that followed felt quieter, as though the storm had washed the noise from the air. The scandal that once defined them still lingered in whispers, but Orion no longer turned away from it. He met it head-on, with action, not apology. The first sign came when Etta's photo series was published in the local paper. Her name appeared beneath images of fishermen, widows, and weather-beaten faces that told stories of resilience. She hadn't submitted them. Orion had. He'd found the forgotten portfolio in her studio by the harbor and delivered it himself, refusing to let her talent stay hidden in the shadows she'd been forced into. When she confronted him, furious and conflicted, he'd only said, "The world should see what I destroyed." Then came the docks. The workers had been using splintered planks for years, the repairs always promised but never funded. Etta heard about the restoration one morning over coffee. It wasn't until she walked down to the pier that she saw the plaque. Small, silver, discreet. Thompson Harbor Restoration, for those who keep the sea alive. She knew immediately who had done it. No grand announcement, no name attached, just an act of quiet reverence. But the past has a way of testing redemption. When gossip resurfaced, an article suggesting her photos were charity work from a Welsh family favor, Orion didn't hide this time. He stood in front of reporters and corrected the story himself, his voice even, his expression unyielding. Etta Thompson doesn't need a family name to legitimize her art, he said. The Welsh name, if anything, should be grateful to be tied to hers. The quote spread faster than the scandal. For the first time, the family's power worked in her favor, and she hadn't asked for it. Still, forgiveness didn't come easily. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the exhaustion of a man trying to rebuild something he once shattered. But love, she knew now, had to be more than memory. It had to withstand truth. So she tested him, not through words, but through distance, disappearing for days, traveling for work, giving him every chance to retreat. He didn't. He showed up to her exhibits quietly, stood in the back, left before she noticed. One evening, as she returned home to find a single photograph framed on her doorstep, their old fig tree, initials still entwined, taken from his view, she realized something had shifted. He wasn't chasing forgiveness anymore. He was learning to earn it, piece by patient piece. And that, more than any promise, was what made her heart begin to tremble again. The weeks that followed unfolded like the slow return of sunlight after a long winter. Etta began to let him back into her mornings, cautiously at first. Coffee shared on the balcony overlooking the harbor, quiet laughter that broke through walls they both had built. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. They just sat there, the sound of gulls and the hum of the sea filling the space between them, as if silence itself had forgiven them before words ever could. Orion no longer filled the quiet with apologies. He simply showed up, steady and unassuming, a presence that anchored rather than demanded. One morning, as she handed him a print still warm from the press, their fingers brushed. The touch was fleeting but electric. the kind of contact that awakens every memory the body tries to forget. Her eyes met his, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to hold its breath. There was tenderness there, yes, but also fear. The understanding that peace this fragile never lasted long. The call came 3 days later. Orion's father had been found in his study, the same room where so many verdicts had been delivered. Heart failure, they said, though the truth was heavier than the diagnosis. The man had lived with his fists clenched around power too long to let go gently. The funeral was a mirror of the life he built, polished, suffocating, a parade of condolences that rang hollow in marble halls. Etta watched from the edge of the crowd, unseen, knowing her presence would stir whispers. Still, she came. For Orion, grief settled over him like mist over the sea, silent, consuming, impossible to outrun, and with it came the weight of legacy. The estate was drowning in debt, its grandeur built on borrowed pride. The board of directors, desperate to preserve the Welsh name, offered Orion a lifeline, a merger with a powerful firm that promised solvency, influence, stability. The only condition was unspoken but clear. His personal life had to reflect their image of propriety, and Etta, for all her grace and quiet strength, didn't fit that portrait. He didn't tell her immediately. She felt it before he said a word, the distance creeping back in, the pauses too long, his gaze turned somewhere unreachable. When he finally confessed, the words were stripped bare. "If I take the deal, everything stays intact," he said quietly. "If I don't." Etta's voice was soft, but it cut through the air like truth always does. "Then maybe it's time to let some things fall apart." And though he didn't answer, she could already see it in his eyes, the familiar pull of duty, the ghosts of loyalty rising once more to claim what love had barely begun to rebuild. The night of the gala arrived with the same golden haze that had once cloaked their undoing. The estate shimmered beneath a canopy of light, every chandelier burning as if trying to disguise the cracks beneath its beauty. Guests moved like reflections of a memory, champagne glasses clinking, laughter rehearsed, secrets polished into charm. Etta moved silently through them, her camera a shield once again. She had promised herself she wouldn't come, but something in her refused to let history repeat without witness. From behind her lens, she saw the ghosts of a decade ago. The same marble floor, the same glances, the same soft cruelty of power dressed as grace. Orion stood near the head of the table, the image of composure in a tailored black suit, but his calm was a mask stretched thin. She could see it in the way his hand flexed at his side, the faint tremor of restraint. The board had gathered for the announcement that would secure the family's future, or bury its soul. The merger contract gleamed in front of him, a monument to everything he was expected to be. The speeches began, predictable in their grandeur. Words like legacy and tradition floated through the room like smoke, beautiful but suffocating. And then came the line that turned the air sharp. One of the partners, his voice smooth and careless, nodded toward Etta's camera. "You've certainly been distracted lately, Welsh. Let's hope your focus is better on paper than it is on her." Laughter followed, not loud but enough, the kind that cuts while pretending not to. Etta froze behind the lens, her pulse quickening, the familiar sting of humiliation rising like heat. But this time, she didn't lower her camera. She kept it aimed, steady, documenting the very moment she expected to break him. Instead, Orion straightened. His voice came quiet at first, so calm it silenced the laughter before it could finish. "You're right," he said. "I have been distracted." By the cost of pretending this is worth saving, the room stilled. He picked up the contract, turned it over once in his hand, and set it down. "My father spent his life protecting a legacy that crushed everyone who tried to love him. I won't do the same." A ripple of shock spread through the crowd. "You'd throw away everything?" someone demanded. He met Etta's eyes across the room. "Everything that never mattered," he said simply. "I'd rather lose an empire than lose my peace, or the woman who taught me what it's supposed to mean." The applause never came, just silence, deep, breathless, and real. And for the first time, the Welsh estate didn't feel like a monument. It felt like an ending. The days after the gala unfolded like the quiet after a storm. No fanfare, no chaos, just stillness and consequence. The estate emptied quickly, its halls echoing with the absence of the people who had once filled them with hollow laughter and brittle pride. The board withdrew their offers, the investors pulled out, and the Welsh name, once a symbol of unshakable legacy, became just that, a name. But for the first time, Orion didn't feel the loss as a wound. It was a release. The walls that had caged him had finally collapsed, and in the wreckage, there was air enough to breathe. He sold the estate without ceremony. The chandeliers came down, the portraits were packed away, and the marble floors that had witnessed both his silence and his defiance were left bare. The sale covered the debts and little more, but neither he nor Etta seemed to care. They moved into a small house near the harbor, where the scent of salt and wood smoke filled the air, and the sound of the sea was constant but gentle. No longer a reminder of what they'd lost, but of what they had left to build. Etta's studio came first. A narrow space with sunlit windows and cracked brick walls, it overlooked the docks where fishermen still mended their nets. She filled it with light and photographs, portraits of the town, of faces weathered by wind and time, of quiet resilience. The locals came hesitantly at first, then in numbers, drawn not by her fame but by the way her work made them feel seen. Orion watched her hang each frame with the same reverence he once reserved for blueprints and contracts. She was building something more honest than any empire he'd known. He spent his days at the edge of town, overseeing the restoration of the old workers' cottages. Where there had once been decay, he built spaces for artists, musicians, and craftspeople. The town began to hum with new life, not the grandeur of wealth, but the steady rhythm of creation. People started calling the row of cottages Welsh Row, not out of loyalty, but respect, a reminder that sometimes redemption doesn't erase a name, it redefines it. In the evenings, they would meet at the harbor, sharing quiet smiles over cups of coffee as the sky turned gold. They rarely spoke about the past anymore. It had done enough speaking for both of them. What remained between them now was simpler, steadier, a kind of peace that didn't demand to be earned, only protected. And in that quiet, they began again. The morning light returned to the harbor with a familiar tenderness, spreading across the water in slow-moving gold. Mist curled low over the pier, soft and weightless, the same way it had on the day Etta first came home. But this time, the air felt different, warmer, steadier, alive with the quiet pulse of a life rebuilt. The town was still asleep behind her, only the faint creak of ropes and the call of distant gulls broke the stillness. She stood at the edge of the wooden planks, camera lifted, framing the horizon through her lens. The world looked softer now, not because the light had changed, but because she had. She pressed the shutter once, twice, the rhythmic click almost like breathing. Each image captured a piece of the morning. Sunlight kissing the water, the reflection of the cottages they'd restored together, the streaks of pink fading into blue. She lowered the camera slightly, taking in the full view with her own eyes. For years, she had tried to chase light in faraway places, believing beauty existed somewhere else, somewhere untouched by her past. But it had been here all along, waiting at the same harbor she once fled from. Footsteps sounded softly behind her, slow and certain. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. The air itself shifted, filled with the warmth of him before he spoke. Orion moved closer until his shadow stretched beside hers, their silhouettes framed in the first light of day. He stopped just behind her, and for a moment they simply breathed in sync, their silence saying everything words would only lessen. Then, without hesitation, his arms slipped around her waist, pulling her gently against him. The camera hung loose in her hands, lens tilting toward the water as she exhaled. The horizon burned brighter, light spilling over the waves in ribbons of gold. Etta leaned back into him, the weight of his chest steady against her shoulders, his heartbeat calm and familiar. It was the kind of peace that didn't announce itself, the kind that simply arrived after the storms had passed. She raised the camera once more, capturing the glow where sea met sky, a quiet promise that endings could look like beginnings if you stood still long enough to notice. As the shutter clicked one final time, Orion's voice brushed the air in a whisper meant only for her. Some loves, she thought, don't fade. They just wait for both hearts to be ready. If this story moved you, share it. Someone out there has watched someone else wear the ring meant for them and still found the strength to stand tall. Comment below if you've ever been counted out, only to return as the lesson they never saw coming. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, drop a comment, and share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe to Black Stories Untold for more stories that uncover hidden struggles, celebrate strength, and remind us that every voice matters.